Have you ever wondered if there are some incredible stories of faith, sacrifice, and miracles hidden in books that most Christians have never even read? If so, you're in for a treat because today we're going to explore the books of Maccabees. These three powerful texts from the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible tell the amazing story of how the Jewish people fought to preserve their faith in the face of an empire that was determined to destroy it. These texts have been banned or excluded from many Christian Bibles, but they contain stories of divine intervention, heroic battles, and the unshakable power of faith. The events in the books of Maccabees will challenge everything you thought you knew. I thought you were familiar with the history of the Bible. So why were these books banned? What secrets do they reveal that you've been denied for centuries? In this video, we'll explore the three books of Maccabees in depth, uncovering the extraordinary details that set these stories apart, from miracles on the battlefield to martyrs who faced death with unwavering faith. These books offer spiritual insights that might leave you in awe. But we won't stop there. If you'd like us to take an even deeper dive into each of these incredible books, please like this video and leave us a comment below. Let us know. If you'd like separate videos dedicated to the first, second, or third book of Maccabees, just let us know and we'll make it happen. We've also added chapter links in the description so you can jump back to any section of the video whenever you need. Take a look at the other videos in our series on the banned books of the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible. We've already covered some hidden gems, like the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and many more. You'll find the links in the description, so be sure to explore those videos as well. Now let's dive into the books. The first book of Maccabees is a hidden chapter of biblical history where faith meets resistance and divine miracles. Imagine if I told you that the spark of one of the most significant rebellions in Jewish history began with a single act of defiance. The first book of Maccabees isn't just a tale of war. It's a story of faith under fire, where the very existence of the Jewish people's religious identity was at stake. This ancient text, which is excluded from many Christian Bibles, has some of the most inspiring moments of faith, resistance, and miraculous victories you've never heard of. The Maccabean revolt took place in the 2nd century BC. At the time, the Seleucid Empire, led by Antiochus IV Epiphanes, was trying to force the Jewish people to abandon their sacred traditions. They wanted to replace Judaism with Hellenistic culture and pagan worship. The temple in Jerusalem was desecrated, and the people were ordered to offer sacrifices to Zeus. For many Jews, this was a line they could not cross. Does this sound familiar? Just as Daniel and his friends stood up to King Nebuchadnezzar, refusing to bow down to the golden image in Daniel 3, the Jews in 1st Maccabees faced the same choice. Either give up their faith or face death. The Maccabean revolt is similar to the trials faced by believers in the Bible, where standing up for God often meant risking everything. The rebellion begins with an act of courage that would change everything. A Jewish priest named Mattathias was confronted by royal officials who demanded he offer a pagan sacrifice. He refused, and in a moment of righteous fury, killed the official who was enforcing the king's decree. This single act of defiance ignited the Maccabean revolt. This moment is reminiscent of other acts of defiance seen in the Bible. There are other examples of zeal in the Bible, such as when Phinehas defended the holiness of God by slaying those who violated the covenant, Numbers 25:7-13. Like Phinehas, Mattathias' bold stand for his faith triggered a movement that would preserve Judaism in one of its darkest hours. After Mattathias' death, the rebellion was led by his son, Judas Maccabeus. He was a military genius and became known as the Hammer. Despite facing a huge number of enemies, Judas and his small group of fighters kept on winning against the Seleucid armies. But these victories weren't just military triumphs. They were seen as miraculous interventions from God. That's where the story takes on a supernatural dimension. Just like Gideon's small army in Judges 7 overcame impossible odds, Judas and his followers believed that God's hand was guiding them. Time and time again, they looked to the heavens and called on God before every battle. When Judas saw the enemy's army, he told his men not to worry about the numbers but to trust in the Lord of heaven, who is mighty to save in battle. 1 Maccabees 3:18. their faith paid off. Despite the odds, the Jewish forces under Judas Maccabeus won battle after battle, driving out the Seleucid forces and reclaiming their land. But in 2 Maccabeus, the faith of these martyrs reaches a new height. They chose death with full confidence that God would reward them with eternal life. And at the heart of this unimaginable scene is the mother. She witnessed the deaths of all 7 of her sons. Rather than crumbling under the weight of such tragedy, she encouraged her sons to stand firm, reminding them of the resurrection and the justice of God. Her faith and strength were similar to Hannah's in the book of Samuel. Hannah dedicated her son Samuel to God's service despite her personal pain. This mother's role in 2 Maccabeus is even more significant. Her encouragement represents unwavering belief in the promises of God. These promises are not just for this life but also for the life to come. In 2 Maccabeus, belief in resurrection is central to the story. The concept of resurrection is only briefly mentioned in the Bible, for example in Daniel 12 verse 2. In the 2nd Maccabees, this idea takes on a really significant meaning. The martyrs face their deaths with the full confidence that God will raise them up in the world to come, where they will receive their eternal reward. This belief in life after death reflects Pharisaic Judaism but also prefigures Christian theology. The idea that the righteous will be resurrected and rewarded becomes a key theme in the New Testament, particularly in Matthew 22, verses 31 to 32, where Jesus says that the dead will rise again. In 1 Corinthians 15, Paul says that the resurrection is one of the most important parts of the Christian faith. In many ways, the martyrs of 2 Maccabeus were like the early Christian martyrs. Their deaths were seen as victories because they believed in the resurrection. Their stories show us that God's justice goes beyond this life. Suffering for doing what is right will be rewarded in heaven. But 2 Maccabeus isn't just about the martyrs. It's also about divine miracles on the battlefield. One of the most striking moments comes during the battle at Bethser. The Jewish forces are vastly outnumbered and on the brink of defeat. But in that moment, something miraculous happens. Suddenly, 5 splendid men on horses with golden bridles appear on the battlefield. They are not ordinary men. They are angels sent by God to shield Judas Maccabeus and his army from harm. These angelic warriors rain down arrows and lightning on the enemy, throwing them into confusion and securing victory for the Jewish people. When the battle became fierce, 5 splendid men on horses with golden bridles appeared to lead the Jews. They took Maccabeus in their midst and shielded him with their armor, keeping him from being wounded. They showered arrows and lightning on the enemy, throwing them into confusion. 2 Maccabeus 10:29-30. This scene is similar to other instances in the Bible where angels play a role, such as in 2 Kings 6 verse 17, where the prophet Elisha's servant sees the heavenly armies surrounding them. These instances in 2 Maccabeus show that God is always present in our battles. He sends his angelic forces to help us. It's always worth remembering that divine intervention is there for us when we need it most. Take Judas Maccabeus, for example. He had a vision of the prophet Jeremiah who handed him a golden sword and told him to take it into battle. This sword wasn't just a weapon. It's a symbol of God's assurance that Judas will be victorious. Jeremiah stretched out his right hand and gave Judas a golden sword, saying as he did so, "Take this holy sword, a gift from God, with which you will strike down your adversaries." 2 Maccabeus 15:16. This vision gives Judas the confidence he needs. He needs to lead his forces into battle, knowing that God's favor is with him. It's a moment that echoes other biblical encounters with divine messengers, such as when Joshua meets the commander of the Lord's army in Joshua 5 hours 13 minutes and 15 seconds, assuring him that God is with Israel as they prepare to enter the Promised Land. 2 Maccabeus is more than just a continuation of the Maccabean revolt. It's a powerful story that brings together the themes of faith, divine intervention, and resurrection. The martyrs who gave their lives for the law of God believed they would be, and the miraculous battles show us that even when we're outnumbered, those who stand with God never stand alone. The stories of 2 Maccabeus had a big impact on early Christian thought, especially the idea that martyrdom and resurrection are connected. The courage of these martyrs. The miracles on the battlefield inspire a faith that looks beyond the suffering of this world, trusting in God's ultimate justice. But as powerful as this book is, the story of the Maccabees doesn't end here. In 3 Maccabees, we see how God's protection extends beyond the battlefield, delivering His people are saved from political oppression in ways you won't believe. The 3rd book of Maccabees doesn't take place in the land of Israel. In fact, this astonishing story of oppression and divine deliverance unfolds in Egypt, far from the familiar battles of Judas Maccabeus. This book shows that God's power isn't limited by geography. He protects His people wherever they are, even in exile. This time, the weapon of choice isn't the sword. It's faith in God's miraculous intervention. The 1st and 2nd books of Maccabees focus on the Jewish. The 3rd Maccabees takes us into the heart of Ptolemaic Egypt, where the Jews face a new kind of persecution, not on the battlefield but in the political arena. Just when things seem darkest, God steps in, and what happens next is nothing short of a miracle. The story begins with Ptolemy IV, the ruler of Egypt, attempting to force his way into the Temple of Jerusalem, fresh off a military victory against Antiochus III. Ptolemy wanted to enter the Holy of Holies, the most sacred part of the temple, reserved only the Jewish high priest's. Arrogance and disrespect for the Jewish faith would soon catch up with him. As Ptolemy tried to enter the inner sanctum of the temple, God struck him with paralysis and blindness, preventing him from desecrating the holy place. Humiliated, and Ptolemy was furious and went back to Egypt, where he planned to get revenge on the Jews in Judea and in Egypt itself. Ptolemy's rage is similar to the arrogance shown by rulers in the Bible. Think of Pharaoh, who was also arrogant. The Israelites, or Nebuchadnezzar, who demanded worship of his golden image. And like those kings, Ptolemy was about to learn that no earthly power can stand against the will of God. Once back in Egypt, Ptolemy IV ordered that all Jews in Egypt be rounded up, registered, and marked for execution. His plan was brutal. He intended to gather the Jewish population into the city of Alexandria and have them trampled to death by elephants in a public spectacle. The situation was dire. Much like Pharaoh's decree to kill all the Hebrew male children in Exodus 12 verse 2. Ptolemy's plan was to wipe out an entire people. The Jews of Egypt were facing total annihilation simply because they refused to assimilate and abandon their faith. But as Ptolemy prepared his horrific plan, the Jewish people did something that would change everything. They turned to prayer and fasting. Instead of giving in, they didn't give up. They called on the God of their ancestors, just as the Israelites did during their time in Egypt. And just like in the days of Moses, God heard their cries. Prayer and fasting have always been powerful tools for getting God's help in times of crisis. In the book of Esther, we see how Esther called for a 3. Similarly, in 2 Chronicles 20, King Jehoshaphat called for a fast when Judah was facing invasion, and God delivered them from their enemies. In the 3rd Maccabees, the Jewish people's faith in God's power to deliver them was unshakable, even in the face of death. Their collective prayer and fasting would soon bring about a miraculous deliverance that no one could have predicted. As the Jews gathered in Alexandria, the elephants were ready to trample the Jewish people, but something incredible happened. God intervened. The animals turned on their handlers instead of attacking the Jewish prisoners. They went wild, trampling Egyptian soldiers and causing chaos in the city. It was a divine act of protection. God had once again saved His people from their oppressors. This moment was similar to other miraculous acts of divine intervention in the Bible. Just as God sent plagues to free the Israelites from Pharaoh in Exodus, He now used the very animals meant to destroy the Jews to save them instead. It was also similar to the parting of the Red Sea in Exodus 14, where God used the forces of nature to deliver His people from certain death. The story of 3rd the Maccabees show us that God's protection doesn't just apply to Israel. It's there for His people wherever they are, even in Egypt, Babylon, or any other foreign land. No matter how powerful a king or empire may seem, they can't compete with the divine protection of the Lord. This idea of God's sovereignty over political systems is also seen in the book of Daniel, where earthly kingdoms rise and fall, but the kingdom of God endures forever. 44. Ptolemy, like Pharaoh and Nebuchadnezzar before him, learned that God's hand cannot be stopped by human power. In the end, Ptolemy IV was forced to abandon his plans and acknowledge the power of the Jewish God. He issued a decree granting the Jews in Egypt freedom to practice their faith without interference, recognizing that their God had delivered them in ways that defied human explanation. The story of the Third Maccabees is a great example of how having faith, even when you're facing political persecution, can lead to God protecting you in amazing ways. The Jewish people in Egypt didn't fight with weapons. They fought with prayer, fasting, and their unshakable belief in God's power to save them. And once again, God proved that no earthly ruler can stand against His divine will. This story of miraculous, the story of deliverance, isn't as well known as the battles of Judas Maccabees, but it has the same important message. When God's people remain faithful, He is always ready to deliver them, no matter how impossible the situation may seem. What do you think of the miraculous deliverance in 3rd Maccabees? Does it remind you of other moments in the Bible when God stepped in to save His people against impossible odds? What are your thoughts on the odds? Let us know in the comments below. If you're inspired by this story of faith, don't forget to like and share this video with your friends. If you've been enjoying our deep dive into the banned books of the Bible, don't forget to check out Deep Bible Stories. We've covered the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and so much more. All the links are in the description,